context into all this, because Behnam Taleblu, is a senior fellow at the think tank Foundation for Defence of Democracies and focuses very much on the Middle East. Behnam, thanks very much for joining us. It's not that new for some attacks, at least, on American facilities and personnel. What do you think is going on here?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. There's a lot more of the same going on in places like Iraq and less so Syria, but an intensification of the same. For instance, if you look at rocket strikes alone, in the past 2 years, there's been over 90 separate instances of indirect rocket fire at facilities inside Iraq alone that are affiliated with the U.S. force presence. Now, many of these facilities are in diplomatic compounds inside the Green Zone in Iraq, which house other embassies, multinational entities, and things of that nature. So there's always the chance for a larger fallout beyond the U.S. But Iran-backed Shia militias inside Iraq are liking to use these sorts of weapons, as well as drone strikes, to kind of beget a cycle of violence to ultimately push for the ejection of America from Iraq and later on the region.
Yeah, we've got the Iran nuclear arrangement being renegotiated almost as we speak. It's hard to imagine that's not playing into it somewhere. Would you agree with that?
Well, I most certainly think it does, and I think for purposes of U.S. policy, it should play into it. However, the Biden administration has taken a rather narrow nuclear first, or shall we say nuclear uber alles approach to the threat posed by the Islamic Republic, first focusing its energy on trying to resurrect that deal and then trying to deal with regional issues. And so I think the U.S. absorbing all this rocket fire, absorbing all this drone fire from January to present was a strategic mistake. And this is only the second time the U.S. has used force in response to rocket fire and in response to drone attacks. And I think it may be too little too late to send a strong deterrent message to some of these Shia militia groups that Iran hopes to leverage at the battlefield, as well as to create a stronger impression of resolve at the negotiating table.
OK, that's interesting, because along with the airstrikes come fairly firm words from Antony Blinken, for example. We will not tolerate these attacks. So where do you think this is going to go? Because if you use language like that, presumably you have to keep delivering on it.
Indeed, you do. And this is in some ways a bipartisan foreign policy failure. The Trump administration used similar rhetoric, perhaps with slightly different means, of course, willing to take risks like killing Iran's chief terrorist and mastermind Qasem Soleimani, who was the head of the notorious Quds Force, which controls these proxy groups. But ultimately, it means the U.S. is at least rhetorically willing to sink more costs and more time into countering them. The challenge is that there is a great chasm or gap between this rhetoric and the reality on the ground in Iraq. In many of these places, people see the U.S. as packing up or worried about its staying power, and they continually see the threat of a rising Iran and a diverse, capable, and increasingly more lethal proxy network.
Right, we'll see where this runs. But Behnam Taleblu, thank you very much indeed for your analysis.
My pleasure. Thank you.